Hi, everybody. It's nice to be here with you all. I was joking with my boys earlier that the new triple stage has tripled the chance of me falling off the stage. I feel like it's about, America Ninja Warrior. Do you know that? It feels a little bit like preaching and running an obstacle course. So hopefully I'm not going to fall. Although my boy said, Dad, it would be great if you fell. So that's kids. So we're a week out from Easter. And Easter, like Stuart was saying earlier, is a time we remember the death and the resurrection of Jesus. It's a really important time for us as Christians. And I want us to spend a bit of time this morning thinking about that. Thinking about why, I suppose the question is, why did Jesus have to die? Why was it Jesus had to die? And what is the sacrifice of Jesus? What does that mean? How does that work? In some sense, it's like a really obvious and central part of our faith, but in another part, it's really quite mysterious. It's quite deep, and I think it's important that we can understand this and communicate it to ourselves to begin with. It inspires hope and insight and relationship, but also so we can share it with other people. I want to start with a verse for you. This is Romans 10:9. It says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. That's like the Easter message, isn't it? Right? That's the Easter message. But today, we're going to think about that. We're going to think about, why did Jesus have to die? Like, what do we mean by the sacrifice of Jesus? And we're going to do this in sort of a sideways way. We're going to have two ideas. We're going to start as humans. Okay? So we're going to start, not as Christians, but as humans. And we're going to think about this idea of sacrifice. Because what I want to show you first is sacrifice. It's not some bizarre religious idea that's difficult to connect with, but rather sacrifice is something that completely makes sense to us as humans. And then, having thought about that, we're going to move that forward into a Christian perspective, and we're going to think, what does the Bible teach us about the relationship between sacrifice and flourishing and our life going well? And then we're going to kind of put those two ideas together and let them talk to each other and try and answer the question, okay, so what does sacrifice mean for us as Christians, and why did Jesus have to die? Does that sound like a good... Okay, right, let's just pray and then we'll start. Father, thank you that you're so good to us. Thank you that you're so good for us. Father, thank you that one of the marks of being in your presence is insight. And insight means new understanding, and new understanding means new solutions and strategies and way forward, which is a way of saying getting out of stuckness, getting out of feeling trapped or without options or without hope. Holy Spirit, would you be with us today as a spirit of insight and of revelation? Would you give us ways forward, Lord? Would you be a spirit of hope for us today? Amen. Okay, right, so I'm going to start by speaking to all the humans in the room. So if we've got any humans, everyone's a human here? Good. So I'm doing this on purpose because the idea of sacrifice at Easter, when we're talking about the sacrifice of Jesus, one of the songs we sung was about, like, we're singing about Jesus' blood. It can feel quite strange, maybe if you're not from a Christian perspective. So I want to start from a human perspective, sacrifice. So I work at the university, and for my third-year students, it's normal for them to start thinking about their degree classification. Like, if I get these results, what kind of degree am I going to get at the end? Like, will I get a 2-1? Might I get a first? And depending on what they discover, they might come and have a meeting with me and say, you know what, Jonathan, I've been thinking about this. I really think if I worked hard, I could get a first-class degree. I would like that. I would like to do that. And then I might say to the students, oh, that sounds great. I've looked at it. I think that's true. But do you know what? You'd have to sacrifice. You'd have to sacrifice. In order to get that future benefit, you'd have to sacrifice. Now, we're meeting in a room in the university. And when I say that to them, the student doesn't sort of look at me and be like, sacrifice? Why are you talking about this ancient religious system of offering dead animals? Why are we talking about smoke and meat and blood? Why? This makes no sense to me. Why, when we're talking about my degree, have you brought up sacrifice? Everybody, that wouldn't happen. You intuitively understood. My student would intuitively understand what is meant by sacrifice. That's worth noticing. Now, this first point is hard to grasp, but not because it's complex. It's hard to grasp because it's obvious. And things that are obvious, like disappearing in the background, they're wallpaper, we're so used to seeing them, it's actually hard to see them. They're so used to them being there. But look, sacrifice, the need for sacrifice in achieving a future benefit is completely obvious to us as people. As humans, it just makes sense. If I said to you, I want to get better at a hobby, at a pastime, if I want to have an improved relationship and say, but you know what, I'll need to sacrifice, that would make sense. The idea that sacrifice secures future benefit presents itself as just part of our world as humans. That's really interesting. That's really interesting. Here's the second part about that, though. The second part is, well, the first part, recap, sacrifice makes sense to us. It presents itself as just a normal part of the world that we live in as humans. But the second part is, as humans, we are so in tune with sacrifice, we're so accustomed with sacrifice, we can actually differentiate between sacrifices that will work and sacrifices that won't work. We can actually select between what would be an appropriate sacrifice and an inappropriate sacrifice. Let me give you an example. One of my postgrad students, she's a rock star. She's doing her postgrad while being a pro golfer. That's pretty cool, eh? I'm not a golfer, but it's pretty cool. And she tells me all about the golf trips she goes on. She's been off to the Bahamas playing golf. That sounds amazing. Now let's imagine, I've got a golf course right beside my house. Let's imagine she kind of talks me into being a golfer. And I'm like, do you know what? I would love to be able to play competitively at a club level. There's a club right next door to my house. I'd love to be able to do that. But because I'm a human, and I know that sacrifice is required to achieve future benefit, I'm going to make appropriate sacrifice. I'm going to put 2 hours aside 6 nights a week. That's 12 hours a week I'm prepared to sacrifice. So I tell this to my student. I say, I want to be really good at golf. I want to be able to play competitively at a club level. She says, Jonathan, you need to sacrifice. I say, I understand that as a human. That makes sense to me. 2 hours a night, 6 hours a week, 12 hours total a week I'm going to sacrifice. She's like, wow. What will you be doing in those 12 hours? I'm like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get some nachos. I'm going to sit on my couch. I'm going to watch Netflix documentaries about golf. I'm going to watch YouTube highlights of golf competitions. I'm going to watch all the best golf videos I can find. What would you say to me? What are you already thinking? That's not the sacrifice that's required. Isn't that interesting? Everybody, we're not talking about us being Christians right now. We're talking about being humans. Sacrifice is so normal and everyday, a part of reality, that not only does it present itself as common sense to us, but we're actually skilled at selecting between this sacrifice would achieve for you your desired result. This one won't. I'm going to give you another example. You'll like this example a lot more than me because it makes me look bad. So when Elizabeth and I were first married, we worked in retail in Dundee, and we had a wee flat just up near Blackness. And I forget exactly the arrangements, but basically she was leaving a wee bit earlier and would come back earlier. I was leaving a wee bit later. So the deal was, Elizabeth says, look, I'm going to be tired when I come back. I've got a long shift. Can you please have hung up the washing and made dinner and left in the fridge? So when I come home and I'm tired, the washing's hung up and there's food in the fridge that I can just warm up. Okay? It's pretty straightforward, everybody. Well, I didn't do that. I didn't do that. I went to work. I didn't stop doing whatever I was doing. I went to work. I was coming home and I was thinking, do you know what? Elizabeth asked me to do those things. The future benefit I would like to secure for myself is I would like a sort of romantic, playful, harmonious environment in my flat. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a sacrifice. I'm going to go a little bit extra on the way home and pick up a bouquet of flowers. It took me a little bit of time, cost me a little bit of money, and I'm going to offer that as a sacrifice to secure for myself a harmonious, loving, playful environment in my flat. Ladies and gentlemen, is that the appropriate sacrifice? Oh, baby. Elizabeth actually took the flowers and hit me with them and said, I can't eat flowers, which comes up from time to time. Look, the reason I'm telling you that, everyone, is that we're talking about the sacrifice of Jesus. It can feel strange. We've just spent, 12 minutes thinking as humans that sacrifice completely makes sense to us. In fact, it presents itself as just a normal part of our world, that we need to sacrifice in order to secure a future benefit. And actually, we can select between sacrifices that will work and ones that won't. Isn't that interesting? I want you to notice that for a minute. Like, just take a moment and be like, oh yeah. How does that help you explain Easter to your friends? How does it help you explain it to yourself? Okay, so we've started off thinking as humans. We're now going to think as Christians. Remember, we're trying to answer this question about, like, why did Jesus have to die? What's the role of sacrifice in our lives? How does sacrifice help make things better? Because that's what we're talking about as humans. We want to offer the right sacrifice to achieve this future benefit. But 2 Bible verses I want to share with you. The first is from Jeremiah. This is God speaking through the prophet Jeremiah in the Old Testament. He says this, stand by the roads and look. Ask for the ancient paths where the good way is. Find it, walk in it, and have rest for your souls. So he's saying there is a good way that you can live. There's a path you can take and things will go better for you. Jesus, Matthew 7, says this, go in through the narrow gate. The gate to destruction is wide. The road that leads there is easy to follow, and a lot of people go that way. But the gate to life is narrow. So there's a call here to flourishing. Like Jesus is saying, there is a way that you can go. There's a way that you can live, that when you're on that way, there's flourishing. It's the way to life. It's rest for your souls. But it's narrow. Now, in order to understand this, we first need to think a little bit about the word narrow, okay? Because we can hear that word and put it together wrong. So when you're learning languages, an easy strategy to bulk up your vocabulary is to look for friendly words. And friendly words are just words that sound the same in both languages. So in Spanish, there's the word comenzar. And comenzar sounds like the English word commence. And guess what? They are the same. They both mean the same thing. Okay, to begin, to start, to undertake. So if you're learning a language, you find your friendly words, you bulk up your vocabulary. But guess what, everybody? There's friendly words. There's also false friends. Dun, dun, dun. Words that sound like they mean the same thing, but don't. So again, in Spanish, is Carolina here? No. No, okay. So you've got the word embarazada in Spanish. Sounds like embarrassed, doesn't it? Doesn't mean that. Any Spanish speakers in the room? It means pregnant. So you can imagine the problems you would get into with this false friend. Everybody, I'm telling you this because the word narrow, in the narrow way that Jesus is calling us to, we can hear like a false friend. Because in a religious context or in a religious framework, if you hear the word narrow, you can think narrow-minded. Okay, religious people are narrow-minded. It's like intolerant, inflexible, judgmental, harsh, critical. That can't be what it means, though, in this saying, because Jesus is calling us to life, to flourishing. Why would he call us to being narrow-minded and intolerant? Those are the people, the Pharisees, that Jesus went for. So it doesn't mean that, but we can think that. The other thing that we can think is that it means like straight-laced. Do you know what I mean? Like people who are like, what would be the phrase? People that are so interested in being good, they're not having any fun. It's like you'd be saying to someone, oh, what are you doing on Friday night? Oh, I'm going to a party. Do you want to come? You'd be like, yeah, I love parties. So you're going, whose party is it, by the way? Oh, it's a Christian party. You'd be like, well, right? There's a sense that it's not really fun, right? Like it's straight-laced, it's sort of restrictive, it's boring parties. That doesn't make sense either, because Jesus is calling us to life, to life. So this narrow way that Jesus is calling us to isn't narrow in the sense of narrow-minded, judgmental, intolerant. It's not like straight-laced and no fun. It's a flourishing life. So what does it mean then? How can we understand what narrow means in connection to sacrifice and to flourishing? Well, we're going to think about it with whiskey and with genies. Okay? Whiskey and genies. So, whiskey has got 3 ingredients: water, yeast, and grain. And there is loads of ways in which those 3 things don't turn into whiskey. Broad is the way. Wide is the way in which those 3 things don't turn into whiskey. Narrow is the way in which they do. Right? Narrow is the way. The gate, Dundee, is one place. Everywhere else in the world is not the gate. Narrow is the way to the gate. Broad is the way to not the gate. Right? So this narrowness that we're talking about, it's not judgmental, it's not repressive, it's not narrow-minded, it's not fuddy-duddy, it's not fun. It's more like purposeful. Purposeful. What happens to whiskey once it's in a cask, once it's in the narrow way, other than getting delicious, right? It develops depth and character and flavor. That happens. So there's something about being on the narrow way that's purposeful, that builds character and flavor, but there's more. There's more. So this narrowness that we're talking about, Aladdin, the genie in Aladdin, lives in a lamp, right? He lives in a lamp. Genie means genius. That's where it comes from. Why does a genius come from a lamp? Why does genius, this big expansive thing, come from a small space? Why is that? All genius comes from a small space. I've got a friend, Jenny McLean, Jenny Robbie. Some folk, I think, playing the Cayley band with her. Jenny is a phenomenal violin player. She's a genius musically. What she can do musically is incredible. Jenny's genius came from walking a narrow path. Because when she was a teenager and in her early 20s, she spent loads of time practicing. Loads of time. She had to narrow herself into this narrow place. But what happened from being there? She developed. She was fruitful, right? She developed this genius. My students who want to get a first-class degree, they can't do anything they want with their time anymore. They have to narrow themselves in. They have to narrow themselves in. But what happens from being there in that narrow place? They become fruitful. They develop. They grow in capacity. I'm trying to do a PhD at the moment. Don't be overly impressed with that. I think at the moment it stands for permanent head damage. That's kind of how I feel about it, right? But once I've finished, I'm hoping I'm going to have a level of understanding and mastery from this learning. But the reality is right now, I can't do what I want with my time. I've got to narrow in. So there's a genius that comes from narrowing. There's like a flourishing. I've heard it said that hell is when the person you are meets the person you could have been. Feel that one, eh? Hell is when the person that you are meets the person you could have been. And that lands for us because I think what we want is to grow. And what we want is to flourish. Like satisfaction in life or meaning in life or happiness in life, you can tail it back to 3 G's. We need to be grateful. That's part of having happiness in your life. That makes sense. You're grateful and you're thankful. Gratitude, by the way, is your haves divided by your wants. So when we have a gratitude practice, we are expanding the haves, lowering the wants, and that gives us that sense of contentment. So gratitude. We also need to be giving. That's like participating, taking part, looking after, being involved. But the last G that they say that we need to have meaning in life, to be happy and flourishing, is to be growing. And doesn't that like resonate with you? That there's, in some ways, there's nothing worse than feeling stuck and trapped and stilted. Like, isn't it a warning sign if someone says to you in your relationship, you know what, I just don't feel like we're growing anymore. I just don't feel like this relationship's growing anymore. If you don't feel like you're growing anymore. So if hell is when the person you are meets the person you could have been, the narrow path is literally the antidote to hell. Because it is the place where you flourish. It's the place Jesus is saying, come and walk in a way. Come and learn to walk in a way where all your potentials can bloom. Where you can look at yourself and say, man, everything that I had within me has been realized. Isn't that a wonderful thing? How does that connect to sacrifice? It connects to sacrifice because that narrow path is the path where you consistently and habitually offer the appropriate sacrifice. Now, you might think, well, that sounds ace. Walk the narrow path, offer appropriate sacrifice. That sounds brilliant. We could probably stop there. I thought the sermon was about why did Jesus have to die? So why did Jesus have to die? What about the sacrifice of Jesus? Well, do we always offer the appropriate sacrifice? Do you always offer the thing that's required? And the narrow path, do you always stay on it, or do you stray and go at the side? You see, I think in the same way that we get this compounding benefit of offering appropriate sacrifice, we get the compounding harm of unoffered sacrifice. Let's imagine that example I gave of me buying flowers instead of hanging up the washing and making dinner. Imagine in that relationship, I habitually did that. I continually did that. Unoffered sacrifice, the wrong sacrifice. It's like a payment that hasn't been made. My sense is that relationships can actually only hold so much unoffered sacrifice. They can only contain so much debt, unmade payments before they fall apart. Does that make sense to people? I mean, you could think about that everywhere in life. If you have a car, your car needs to be looked after. If you habitually don't make the right offerings, your car will fall in disrepair and then fall apart. Your body's like that. Your body needs particular things to be healthy. If you habitually, continually don't do that, that harm and debt will accrue and build up, and then it'll stop working like it should. Relationships are like that. I think our souls are like that. I think we're like that on the inside. When we do things and we think, why did I do that? Why did I do that and not this? Why did I make that and not this? Why have I strayed off the narrow path? How come I'm not growing? My sense is that, yes, we can offer the right sacrifice and be on the narrow path and see all the benefit, but we can equally not. And what we end up doing is gathering damage and harm and debt. So what do we do with that? What do we do with that? Well, I'm glad you asked. Because there's one more thing I haven't told you about sacrifice. Now, again, this is sacrifice as humans. I've already said as humans, we know that sacrifice is needed, and it seems normal for us. We can actually differentiate between sacrifices that will work and don't work. But there's a third thing about sacrifice as humans, and that is that we know that one person's sacrifice can achieve something for a group of other people. We know that because of sports. It was just the Six Nations, right? And if I said to you, as a Scotland fan, hey, we won at the weekend, you wouldn't say to me, what are you on about? You don't play for Scotland. Scotland won at the weekend. No, that would make complete sense to you that I'm claiming the victory of this team achieved on my behalf. If I said to you, we scored a try on the 10th minute, it was amazing, that would absolutely make sense to you. Why does that make sense to you? I'm going to use a big word, phenomenological. It just means a phenomenon is a thing. So we're looking at this thing in the world. What is it about sports as a thing in the world? Why is it? Why is it we're so captured by this? Why do we stand up and cheer when someone else achieves something? Why do we celebrate it? Why do we sing about it? Why do we claim it as our own? I'm going to tell you, everybody, it's because it's true. It's because it sings to something really deep inside of us. One person can achieve something for someone else. We know that's true. So at Easter, when we say Jesus died for us, that's not strange. That's so deep inside about what it means to be a human. We celebrate that. We use that language. Everybody, the unoffered, undone, badly done, poorly done things that we gather and accrue throughout our lives that damage us and the world around us, Jesus takes that for us. He's the sacrifice for it. He wins for us. And the reason that sports inspires us so much is because it sings to something deep inside of us. We know that's true. Now, you might say, oh, baby, I like that, Jonathan. That's a good point. I never thought of that before. Here's my problem. I could have all this accrued debt, harm, unoffered sacrifice, And Jesus can forgive me. Awesome. Here's my concern. I can't find the good way. I don't know where it is. Jeremiah says, find the ancient path. Find the good way. Go and walk in it. Jesus says the way to destruction and harm is really broad. The way to life is really narrow. I don't need just more information. I actually need something. I need someone to help me. I need a sense of hope that I can stay on this good path. I'm not looking for an ethic. It sounds like we've got an ethic at this point. Here's some good advice for you. Stay on the narrow path. Right? But there's more. There's more. There's one more thing I've not told you about. What were the two things we're talking about? First was sacrificed. Flourishing. The narrow way. There we go. There's one more thing I've not told you about the narrow way. I'm going to tell you this with a story, and then we're going to finish. When my boys were wee, I had our first foreign holiday. We went to Spain, and we booked Airbnb. We'd never used Airbnb before. It was still pretty new at that point. And the deal was we would land in Malaga, and then through the app, message the host, Pepe, to say we were there, and she was going to give us better instructions. Because she's like, look, you've got the address, but it's pretty hard to find, right? Narrow is the way to our holiday, right? Pretty hard to find. That was the deal. So we landed. It's late at night. My boys are tired. They're only wee. Message Pepe on the app. No response. Pick up our luggage. Message Pepe. No response. Hire the car. Message Pepe. No response. The kids are literally sleeping in the back. See, I'm thinking we've been had, right? I don't have money to do another thing. It's kind of stressful. We're sort of driving in the direction we think the holiday accommodation is. At this point, everybody, broad is the way to our holiday being ruined. Narrow is the way. We stopped off at a petrol station, and I showed the guy there. Actually, I'm saying I did. Elizabeth did, because she speaks Spanish. She showed the guy the thing, and he gave her much more detailed instructions. We had detailed instructions, everyone. We had guidance. We had an ethic. We had rules we could follow. I still didn't feel like we were going to get there. Having those rules, those detailed instructions, weren't enough to sort of put me at peace, to be secure that my holiday was going to work out. And then guess what? Something amazing happened. Those rules, those instructions, those directions transformed into a person, because Pepe called. And she said, I'm so sorry, my phone was dead. I'm going to come and get you. And then I'm going to take you there. So I didn't have a set of rules to follow to try and stay on this narrow way. I had a person. Jeremiah says, there is a good way. Look for it. Find it. Stay on it. Jesus says, I am the way. In the Old Testament, there's a way that we have to look for and find. In the New Testament, the way comes and finds us. I know that's true, because here you all are, and here Jesus is. So what is this about sacrifice then? Why did Jesus have to die? As people, we intuitively know that sacrifice is required. We can select between ones that will work and ones that don't. But we also don't consistently do that. And it builds up harm and damage in ourselves, in our relationship, in our world. But we also know that one person's sacrifice can achieve something for us. That's why we celebrate sports. That's what Jesus does for us. That's what he did for us at Easter. That's what we celebrate. That's why we worship, right? But we also know that that information about walking a narrow path is not enough. And the invitation of Christianity is not just to better information, but it's an invitation into a relationship. Come and know Jesus, who is the way. Come and walk with him. Come and live a life that flourishes. All right, let's take a minute to pray. And then I'd like to respond. We just close our eyes, everybody. Father, thank you that you didn't come to give us good rules for living. Lord, thank you that you came to make a way for us. A way, Lord, where we feel stuck and without a way. Father, thank you that you came and dealt with the debt and the damage that we can accrue as we go through life. That your sacrifice at Easter pays for that, saves us from that, redeems us from that. Holy Spirit, I just pray if there's people here this morning who feel that that's them, I'm just carrying a lot of debt, a lot of damage, a lot of harm. I feel weighed down by this. If that's you, I want you to know the reason that these ideas of sacrifice sing to you, appeal to you, is because it's true. And I want to invite you to respond to Jesus this morning and his offer. Or if you feel lost, if you feel, I don't know the way to navigate forward in my life, I'm certainly not flourishing. I've tried everything else, but I'm stuck. Come and meet Jesus. He's not a set of rules. He's a person we can introduce you to. He's someone that will walk with you, that will guide you, that will come alongside you. Yeah, so Father, we just pray in people's hearts that you would do that work. And if that's you, I'm gonna invite you at the end of the service. There's a wee corner over here. If that's you, come and speak to somebody. Don't let this just be a moment of new information, but allow it to be a moment where you make a decision and make a change. Come and meet the person who is the way to a flourishing life.